doing those things, then you start because like I can't, like a lot of people, I've seen these workshops and they just come there and start talking. Cool. Yeah. Even my keynote speeches, I could have 1,000 people in the audience. I'm going to look over here at the back of the room. We're going to engage. I'm going to engage with you. I'm going to engage with you. I'm going to make sure the whole room feels seen and felt. So when I have a group of 20 or 15 young men, I'm going to make sure everybody feels felt. They're seen. I'm going to say, what are your biggest fears? And then like when I was at the Alaska Child Center, there was 14 to 18-year-old young boys, right? So these young boys is juvenile center, right? Okay. So I did a circle, and of those 19, I went around the room, what's your biggest fears? A majority of them said being successful. Because if I'm successful, I know I'm inevitably going to fail, you know? And it was just, because there's, that's where I go. I go to those places where how can I impact the souls who really need it? And then if I see breakthroughs happen, okay, that's how our people did it. Because I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to sit there and tell all these kids about the glory days. It speaks for itself. You know what I mean? So I'm going to tell you about the hard days. I'm going to tell you about the depression. Even through my pro career, a lot of people like to see the glitz and glamour. I was in Turkey making a lot of money in a huge penthouse suite, paid for by the team. We're sponsored by Audi and FS Pilsner. FS Pilsner like the Budweiser of Turkey. So like the team I played for is pretty well recognized, right? I'm in an amazing situation. Pictures of Turkey. It's beautiful. It's great. People don't realize I'm going home to my apartment every single day for 9 months because my son can't travel to the Middle East. I don't have Thanksgiving. I don't have Christmas, you know? So that's why I look at my journey as like being able to tell that story or tell any of those stories. So men, both young and old, feel like, okay, I could be more open about my story. Mm-hmm. And I've seen so many breakthroughs. I've seen so many men open up because of that vulnerability. And it's not even about me being me. It's about creating that safe space, right?
And I work. Every day takes some work.
Every space I go to, whether it's that group of 14 to 18-year-old boys who are saying those tough things and talking to them about it and trying to talk them through it and find out alternatives and telling them like, okay, let's develop a self-care plan so that when you leave here, let's come up with goals. And what I told them is like, okay, I'm going to come back here only if you guys set up. I want you guys to all establish 5 goals for when you get out of here so that you stay busy so that you don't come back. Mm-hmm. You know, we're talking about those things of like, okay, we're going to acknowledge that's some tough shit, but we're going to say, okay, how are we going to get out of it? How are we going to talk about it? So that's why I focus on all these kids, these young boys and men in general is how are we going to create that vulnerability? You know, how are we going to break down barriers? That's a tough thing for a lot of people.
So I'm curious to know, like, how do you approach this idea, you know, and not create this victim mentality with the participants in your men's health stuff?
Like saying like poor, like, oh, all these things have happened to me. This is why I did this.
Yeah,
okay.
This
yes. And that's why accountability is so important. Okay. And that's what I emphasize too with a lot of them is like you have like, and I focus on that is like when you leave these things, you have to spend time with people who are actively working on it too. So you can hold each other accountable because same thing, you know, when it get like, you know, there's times too when people who are working on the right path or whatever go back around a bunch of people who aren't around these friends and that's negatively influenced, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what can happen. So that's why I emphasize you have to hold each other accountable while doing the work, which is very tough, you know, because we're like I said, it's literally like racism. It's exactly like racism, this patriarchy, but it's not patriarchy. Men are taught certain the aspects of patriarchy as far as disrespecting women, but Native and brown men don't benefit from patriarchy. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the aspects we're taught and we're groomed from young people. You know, I was having this conversation with my friend who also started like really trying to work on healing himself, right? So we were talking about that and we've both have had some success. He's had a lot of success in the Native communities, right? And he's been in movies and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about how, you know, a lot of the damage he did as far as disrespecting women, you know, sleeping with women and doing all those things. Mm-hmm. And he talked about how he had to actively acknowledge it and say, okay, let's go down a new path. And we're sitting there talking. We're like, okay, like fudge, man. Like, look at the influences we had growing up. Like, look at the role models we looked up to. Of course, this is the path we're probably going to go down to if we don't have anybody telling us differently. Right. And then once you have this habit for so dang long, it's pretty tough to break. Mm-hmm. But it takes active work. It takes active work. You can't just be like one day be like, oh, all these women told me to respect women. oh, the light bulb went off, I'm going to start respecting. It doesn't work like that, because there's so many different behaviors and habits that are programmed in you, just like muscle memory, just like me shooting the basketball a million times in my lifetime. It took me a lot of shots, right, to get good at something.
Sitting in reflection, brush away the pain, and I'm living in the present. Won't settle for less. Spent too long in the misery, and every day I work, searching for the inner peace. What's my life?
What would you say are some of the biggest issues that Native men face today?
I think it's identity. A lot of it's identity, not feeling like you belong somewhere, not feeling like a lot of our Native men don't have families. A lot of them grew up obviously in troubled homes or whatever. But when we look back to the further parts, like when you really talk about identity, like I said before, is like our men had all of our identity stripped from us. Mm. I think that's a lot of it is like actually having conversations on, the why. Just like we're having conversations on the why of everything else. That's the big why in our communities. Okay, if we could help our men heal, that solves a lot, because our men obviously are some of the biggest perpetrators of the damage in our communities, right? Mm-hmm. So if we could heal our men, if we could have our men talking about healing and actively focusing on it, and that's constant. Like I said before, it's a lot of work. It has to be active. It has to be active interactions with other men who are working on these things. So that's what I really emphasize is like, after that gathering stuff, we learned a little bit. It was cool. And, it was all right. But I've learned more by doing what I'm doing. Going to the McLaughlin Center where it's 16, 18-year-old young men there's some in there for murder. Yeah. Going in there and seeing if I could, because I know bodies, and I could see bodies, and I could see if I'm impacting somebody. Mm-hmm. I could see if they feel me. Because I've been speaking for a long time, and I know that's my strength, is engaging. And at first they walk in there and they're all, a lot of them are tough and everything, and they're leaning back when I walk in, I'm talking to them, they're like lean back in their chairs, like kind of whatever. Couple minutes in, 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in, they're leaning forward after they're coming up and shaking my hand. And like, a lot of them are considered disrespectful. A lot of them are considered the kids that nobody could save. I'm talking to them after, and that's what I'm painting that picture for them, because a lot of them want to do well. They want to do good, but they grew up in hell. Yeah. Like I'm sitting there interacting with them after and like asking them questions. They're telling me their backgrounds and the things they grew up around. And it's like, but it goes back to the deeper root of it, is that there's so much intergenerational trauma passed down to our men, because like I said before, is, when our villages were overtaken, the Aleuts, when they were all like the Aleut men, they had to hunt for the freaking Russians, or their families would be killed. Mm-hmm. Think about that. So that happened to a lot of our people all up and down the coast. So basically, a lot of our men were out having to hunt and fish for them, and then they had all those roles taken from them. They couldn't protect their communities. Were the warriors, were the protectors. Then they take away hunting and fishing, right? They regulate those things. We can't make a good living off those things anymore. We have all these regulations. We're being regulated by the state. Then on top of that, what do? Divide and conquer us again, is they start making education very accessible to our Native women. You know what I mean? Giving incentives. So look at all these women that went off. You think about it. Think about all the women that have the PhDs back in the 70s and in the 80s from Alaska. They're nothing but women. There's no men on that list. You know what I'm saying? So all those men who couldn't go off and get an education, they're stuck in the village doing what? Drinking, right? And continuing to like figure out ways to cope, because they can't make a living.
They lost their cultural ties.
They lost everything. They lost the cultural ties. They lost their connection to what am I giving to my community. Yeah. So I'm just gonna cope with this. And then obviously residential school. Yeah. All of that's the biggest one. Residential school, because they took all that generation, they took all of their kids away, so they couldn't be fathers anymore. And then all those boys who came back, what did they do? They came back and they did what was done to them. They were sexually abused for years, all those boys, and then they're thrown back in the community. Yeah. So there's generations and generations, and growing up, I remember being a young boy and my mom telling me not to go to the certain elder's house. Mm-hmm. Don't you ever fucking go over there, ever. I'm like, what? Those three boys go over there, why can't I? Then I think like, those three boys are in jail on drugs, and I'm sitting there thinking like, did what happened, right? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because they went down a very, very bad paths, right? Yeah. So it's like, what was happening? Like my mom was saving me. And I'm sitting there wondering all the time, like, he's a good guy. That guy's a good guy. What? And my mom was like, no. But she didn't really tell me like the real stuff until I got older about the things that all these men did. She told me to steer clear of, but all these men, they were, those things were done to them.
Right.
That's not a conversation that's had, it needs to be had and needs to be addressed without, it's just, like we talk about, it's complex conversation, because how do you address it and acknowledge what has happened to those people who have committed these things? Because everybody knows it, but how do you address it and not condemn them, which what people want to do. See, so it's very complex. It's bringing them to the table and acknowledging what has happened and using that as a platform or something to create change, and acknowledge like this happened. This has happened. This was generations ago that all these very, very terrible things started happening to our men, right? And we're still paying the price for it. There's still a lot of young boys in these communities that are hurting, because of absent fathers.
Searching for the inner peace. What's my life like? Sitting in reflection, brush away the pain, and I'm living in the present. We'll settle for less.
Like, what historical key moments do you think influenced where we are today?
I think when they first arrived, like I emphasize, is like, women, you guys never lost your roles, Like, you guys were able to continue to flex your roles. You were able to weave, sew, bead because it was useful. All of your guys' skills and what you guys did was all useful. And on top of that, you got to continue to preserve our culture by giving birth. That's where it first happened. Is then like I said, there were steps. They took away all those things, our hunting, our fishing. They took our roles away from us, and then it made it only valuable you have to start being educated in order to have any type of value to your family. For a long, long time, like the Haida men, we were trained to be warriors from the time we were young kids. And once we started to die off and everything, and we couldn't practice our culture anymore, a lot of men lost those roles too. A lot of men lost that savagery, like that being able to be a real warrior of doing whatever it takes. Because back, doing whatever it takes to protect my village. We lost all of that. Like, I joke around with bringing my son back to Heidelberg. We went down to move something by the totem house and by the longhouse, and I turned around and he was gone. I looked down on the river and he's down there stomping fish with the village kids. I'm like, yep, that's my boy. Cause I joke around with people because, he lives a privileged life. He lives a very privileged life. Like, this dude said to me, he had the nerve to say to me, "Dad, are we flying first class?"
Oh my goodness.
He's 6 years old, but I make sure he understands like where I came from. So like I'm proud that I could, but he's too civilized right now. It's like a lot of men lost because they had to get civilized. Being uncivilized was good because you had that killer instinct of, I'm going to protect my damn community. I'm going to make sure everybody's fed. I'm going to make sure my elders are taken care of. Being uncivilized, right? Like, I was talking to a lot of women about that, like Elizabeth Medicine Crow. She was talking about how they needed to bring back real warrior training, right? For our men. Not survival, but real warrior training, how our men learned how to fight with paddles. Like, my mother would teach classes on that, like, when I was young, because my mom spent time with all the elders that are talked about and referenced in all of our language content and everything. My mom spent the majority of her lifetime with those elders, learning protocol, learning all the arts of our hunting, our fighting, our fishing, the stories of our goddesses, our women, like, all these things. So being able to be around her, because like, I'm always been comfortable with women, like, being at the forefront, because my whole life, my mom was a gangster, like, literally, like, people, I always reference back. We went to Haida Gwaii. I always think about this. We went to Haida Gwaii when I was like 9.
What is that?
Haida Gwaii, it's in Queen reference to Queen Charlotte Island. It's where Haidas originally came from. Haida Gwaii. There's 2 communities over there, Skidegate and Masset, right? 2 Haida communities.
Okay.
Skidegate, there's a freaking, I think it was 5 totem poles there. It's huge event. My mom led the dance group in that year, right? We went over there with a lot of people, and she orchestrated like one of the craziest, people still talk about it to this day. Like, it was a 10-minute, 15-minute standing ovation, like nonstop for like, because she just, I don't know, I'm like, dude, ask all the OGs throughout Southeast Alaska, the Sarah Dibdals, all these women who inspired them when they were coming up as dance group leaders. It was my mother, because like what's being highlighted now is a lot of these things, like where language work and, doing all these cultural things, where my mom was doing it before it was quote unquote cool, right? She was doing it when there was no money around it. She was the one writing the original grants back in the day, right? For language.